Everyone, Rob, Lake Michigan Angler here. Just want to give you a basic rundown on salmon eggs and trout eggs for fishing for trout and salmon, mainly here on Lake Michigan on the west side. Everywhere you look and everywhere you go, they're going to fish eggs a little differently. I just want to talk about how we do it locally here in southeast Wisconsin and northeast Illinois. And I want to go over the different types of eggs there are, different ways of rigging them, and a little bit of like the do's and do nots on fishing with eggs. So right now we're in the peak of the salmon run here. A lot of fish are biting on eggs right now. In fact, they're starting to switch over from lures to eggs, mainly during the day. The egg bite's been pretty good. So you're going to see a lot of people fishing bobbers out there, fishing with eggs, and you're going to see some catching a lot of fish and some that aren't. So hopefully by the end of this, you'll be one of the guys who are catching a lot of fish. So we're going to start with the different types of eggs here. And of course, there's salmon eggs and there's trout eggs. This right here, you see all the eggs are in a big clump. They're all connected in this membrane. This is called skein. And skein is one of the most effective ways of catching salmon this time of year, in September here. And it's pretty easy to use, and it's just a great bait. Right over here, we have trout eggs, and these happen to be loose. So when the fish starts to ripen up, getting closer to actually being able to spawn, the the membrane deteriorates, and these eggs become loose, and these need to be tied into a spawn sack. Now you can tie this into a spawn sack as well if you prefer. Sometimes that'll work better than just using the skein as it is. But the way it is right now, in this membrane, is the way most people are fishing it. Uh, there's also alternatives to eggs, like fake eggs, rubber eggs, stuff like that. But nothing beats the real thing most of the time. So what you're going to see is that these eggs are cured. When you buy eggs, they're always going to be cured. Um, is kind of the only way to get them, but that's a really good way to get them. So what curing is that it preserves the eggs, it enhances the scent and flavor of it, and enhances the color of the eggs. And there's different products to do that. We'll do another video on how to cure the eggs, but right here we have some cures from Potski and Atlas Mikes, and over here we have some cures from ProCure. Now, as you can see, I'm wearing rubber gloves. I think it's important to wear rubber gloves when you're handling real eggs because, for one thing, it keeps your hands clean because fishing with eggs is messy, and it keeps your human scent or whatever scent you might have on your hands soap off the egg so it stays as natural as possible. Now, right now, most of the fish are in the harbors. The rivers are really, really low, so they haven't really made their way upstream yet. So the harbors are pretty loaded up with fish, and you're going to see a lot of people fishing with slip bobbers here. So the main slip bobber rig for when you're skein fishing is going to be a braid main line. Right here we have a bobber stop and a bead so that the bobber stop does not slide into the bobber. Right here we have a Nova float, and below that, we have an inline bobber weight. You can also use an egg sinker. And then we have a leader going to a size 1 octopus hook. This is the main rig for skein. It's important to use a lot of weight because skein is going to feel heavy when you have it hanging in the air from your rod. The rod tip's going to bend over. It feels really heavy, but when it hits the water, it doesn't sink very well because it's mainly made up of water. So you need that weight to get it down as fast as you can so that it gets to the fish before it drifts away off the fish or in front of another angler. Just needed to get it down on in front of their noses as fast as possible. If you don't use enough weight, it takes a really long time to sink. And by the time that your bobber stop finally hits the bobber here, you've already drifted off of your spot in front of somebody else, and you have to recast, and you're just never getting the bait in front of the fish. So, like I said, this is the most common way to fish with eggs right now is in that skein. And all you do is just take a scissors and cut a chunk off like that, and then you can put the hook through it a couple times and just lob it out there on like that. You can also use what's called an egg loop knot when you tie on your hook. It's a good way to keep those eggs on the hook better so you can cast a little easier, especially if you're casting far or you're fishing in a river where you're casting over and over again. Just a good way to do it. There's a million YouTube videos out there on how to tie a egg loop knot, so you can go ahead and check those out if you want. The next thing is when it's sitting in the water, you want to keep it at least 2 feet off the bottom so the gobies don't eat all your eggs. Because around here we have a lot of gobies and they love eating these eggs. And the last thing you want to do is waste all of your eggs catching gobies. So keep it up off the bottom so they don't get to it. And that way, you know, if anything does bite it, it is a salmon. And when they're fired up, they're going to swallow these eggs, and there's no messing around. The bobber's going to go straight down. But 90% of the time, they're not fired up. And they just come up and nibble at it. And you'll get like a little bluegill bite, like two little twitches on that bobber, and that's it. That's your window to set the hook. So make sure you're watching that bobber closely. The really serious egg fishermen are just gonna be holding that rod in their hand the whole time because they know they need to set the hook as fast as possible. I know a lot of us, like, it's hard to just sit and watch a bobber. We want to cast a lure. We'd rather catch it on lures because that's more fun. But a lot of times, if the eggs are the only way to catch them, if that's the only thing they're biting on, then you really do need to hold on to that rod, because if you're reeling in another rod or another lure and your bobber, you get a bite, it goes down a little bit, comes back up, and you got to reel in that bait or put the rod down. By the time you get to your other rod, reel up the slack and set the hook, the fish is already gone. So it's really important to be quick on that bite. Later in the season, when we're fishing for brown trout and steelhead, that's when I like to save my trout eggs for, especially for the brown trout, because they're quite picky when it comes to their eggs compared to steelhead or salmon. Right here we have loose brown trout eggs, and they're uncured. Uh, they prefer a lesser cured egg than the salmon do or steelhead do. Steelhead will eat uncured eggs. They do like cured eggs. Sometimes they're a little more aggressive fish than the brown trout can be. Now these are get tied into a spawn sack right here. It's a pink spawn sack. You can tie it in different colors if you want. There's yellow and there's blue and there's chartreuse and red and orange and all that. So it's good to tie a variety of colors. I like to fish it under a bobber. What I do for my trout setups is I lighten everything up here. So I don't like to be as heavy with the spawn sacks for trout as I am with the kings. I'll often use a smaller bobber. I'll use a lot less weight, a lighter leader. So right here, this is 15 pound. I'm going to switch to 8 for that, for the trout, maybe even 6 sometimes if the water is really clear. And I'm definitely switching to a much smaller hook like these size 8 octopuses, sometimes even size 10s. Um, and I want, in this situation, at least for when I'm harbor fishing most of the time, I want a slow, natural fall on the spawn sack. So I will use a longer fluorocarbon leader. I'm not going to use a big weight. I might just use a couple split shots up near the bobber, very far from the spawn sack. And what seems to work best for the brown trout is just a really slow, natural fall with that spawn sack. And if you can get that, you'll definitely catch a lot of fish. Sometimes I do cure my eggs just to help get them to last longer in the fridge. And sometimes it's just a little bit of borax, just a little bit. Sometimes I just use pickling salt and some krill powder. Um, but overall, it's a very mild cure compared to the king eggs over here in the skein. Now, brown trout and steel definitely will eat king skein or king eggs. If you only have loose king eggs and you need to tie those up, they will eat it. But this is just what they seem to prefer most of the time, and you can't really go wrong with it. If you are looking for eggs to purchase, one thing to keep in mind when you're buying it is if it's not refrigerated, it's probably not very good. You want something that does have a shelf life to it. If it's been cured to the point where it'll last forever on the shelf at room temperature, those usually aren't good eggs. And if I'm looking at trout eggs like these, I want them to be translucent. Um, it definitely seems to make a difference over a lot of the other eggs out there. And I just want to change the colors with the different netting. There's also alternatives to eggs with fake eggs. There's jarred eggs. Usually, if you get a spawn sack that comes in a little jar like this, for our fish here, they're not very effective. Same thing with like these jarred eggs here. These are loose jarred eggs. You can actually put them on a hook. Again, they're not the most effective in Lake Michigan here for our trout and our rainbows. You see them more effective in like stocker situations where they just create a put and take fishery with fish straight from a hatchery. Those fish aren't as picky. They definitely work for that. And then you have artificial eggs, like right here is a jar of rubber eggs that are scented with anise. These are eggs that are soft beads, and you run the line through them. And then right here, these are hard beads where you run the line through them, and then that hook hangs back about an inch and a half or two. And they have their moments, especially in rivers, where they work pretty well. Um, the difference between fishing eggs in rivers and in the harbors is that when a fish is in a river and it's swimming in the current, and you cast your bait upstream of it, your float upstream of it, and let it sink down or float down in front of that fish, the fish only has like a moment or two to decide if it's going to bite or not. And in that time, it's more often going to fall for something like a bead here, based on the color and the way it works. And you can always add a little scent to it if you want. But in the harbors, the fish have all the time in the world to come up and examine your bait and decide if they want to eat it or not. They can say, this egg doesn't look right. This egg smells funny. All these different things to deter them from biting. So it's a really important to just have good quality eggs for those fish, and really don't spend your money on jarred or fake eggs for harbor fishing. Um, Again, it needs to be something that has to be kept cold. So you're going to see like skeins sometimes where it's like vacuum packed and it can hang on a shelf for like 2 years. That's usually not very effective either. Um, Personally, if I don't have eggs, I'm not even going to use this kind of stuff. I'm going to find other ways to catch them. I'd rather use lures, or in the case of when you're fishing for the trout and the rainbows, the brown trout, or even spring cohos, if you don't have eggs for those fish, uh, shrimp works great. Tube jigs with waxies works great. But yeah, just regular shrimp from the grocery store. There's all sorts of different ways to catch those fish that I feel are much more effective. So another way you can rig up your spawn sacks, whether it's with salmon eggs or with trout eggs, is in a spawn sack with floaters like these little styrofoam floaters. So you can fish it off the bottom; it'll float up, um, and fish it without a float. Just a good heavy weight, egg sinker, a sliding weight, whatever. Cast it out there, let it get a couple feet off the bottom so the gobies don't eat it. That can be especially good early in the spring, right after ice is out, off pier heads or in places like that. Uh, there's all sorts of different ways to rig them. If you look into what they do on the West Coast, they fish it much differently than we do here. And even in Michigan, in their rivers, they fish it differently than we do sometimes. So depending on where you are and the type of water you're fishing, it can definitely change. You know, around here, our water, even though there's current, is pretty slow moving water compared to other places. And that definitely affects how we fish our eggs. So thank you for watching. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. I'd also like to hear your tips on running eggs. And if you need any of the gear here, you know where to get a hold of me, lakemichiganangler.com. Call the shop at 224-789-7627, or just stop in. I'm happy to answer more questions for you and set you up with all the gear you need. Have a good day.